Hello and welcome to your guide to a successful home inspection. And your guide today is Ryan. Ryan, thanks for being with us.
Hey, thanks for having me, Justin.
All right, before we get into the actual home inspection, Ryan, if you were a neighborhood anywhere in Atlanta or anywhere in the world, what would be your spirit neighborhood?
You know, probably Asheville. I grew up in Atlanta. I love Atlanta. I love everything about it. But my heart is always in the mountains and in the trees. And it's just a vibrant town, very, very friendly, really great downtown, a lot of good restaurants.
I love it. I can definitely see that for you. Awesome. All right.
Yeah.
So as we get into the home inspection, so we found our house, we got it negotiated, have it under contract. Obviously, got to get the house inspected. What is the first thing for buyers to do at this point to get their home inspection process started?
So what I like to do is walk the buyer through the home. Just pick out anything that we can see with our eyes. An inspector is going to pick out any known latent defects. So they're not going to pop into your drywall and see if there's anything about there going on behind it. But there are certain companies that can do services that will check air quality, that will check for mold, offer any sort of references to maybe a structural engineer if the home is built on a crawl space or on piers. They'll make recommendations towards that thing. So what I want to do is do our own inspection first so we can kind of anticipate what the inspector is going to find, or if there's anything that we find that we want to make sure that they notate on that report.
Yeah, I absolutely love that. And so I think that leads to the question, so what does the inspector actually look at? You mentioned, I mean, obviously they're not tearing the drywall down. What are the big
Right.
things that during the home inspection that the inspector is evaluating?
So they're gonna do a few things. They're gonna check your electrical, make sure that panel looks healthy, the age of it. They're gonna check any plumbing that they can see underneath the sink, any fixtures that they can see. They're gonna go into a crawl space or any sort of attic space, make sure that it's adequately insulated, make sure that there's no rodent or pest problems in those areas. They're gonna look around the house and make sure there's no issues with siding, or if it's a brick home, make sure there's no issues with the brick. And they're going to check to make sure there's no, looking for any sort of deferred maintenance that could be there, maybe any sort of wood rot in the soffits. They're going to check the age of the roof. They can kind of guess about how old it is based on what the shingle is doing.
So that's a pretty substantial list of things that the
Yes.
inspector is looking at. How long should a buyer expect for the inspection to take?
So if you're looking at about a 15 to 2,000 square foot house, I imagine them to be there from anywhere from 2 hours to 3 hours.
So that's a pretty long time. I mean, so they're looking at
Yeah,
a lot of stuff. Then, do you recommend that the buyer should be there for the inspection?
absolutely. Absolutely. At the very least, I recommend that they be there at the end for a walkthrough of the summary. Um, so then the inspector can point out things that are going to be on the report.
Yeah, it's so much different seeing them in person than seeing them on paper. Because what do
Absolutely.
buyers, when you get the report, how long is that report usually? What kind of, is it a 1 or 2 page document or is it maybe a few more?
Well, it depends on the inspector for sure, but it can be, figure 9 to 15 pages or so is probably standard depending on the size of the house and how much needs to be documented.
And it can be scary, I feel like, looking at the paper if you haven't actually seen it yourself.
Yes, and one thing I like to do before this report gets to my buyers, I want to kind of set the expectation here. They're going to report everything. They're going to report everything that they can see, and it can be very, very daunting, and it can be very, very scary.
Yeah.
But it's good to know all of these things, and I kind of use an analogy of like buying a used car. You're buying a used car, it may have 60,000 miles on it, may have 100,000 miles on it. It's going to have a tear in the seat. The shift knob might be a little worn, but it's still going to get you down the road.
Yep.
And so when you buy a house, it's a living, breathing thing. Every day you're going to need to do something to it.
Mhm.
And it's just part of home ownership. And you look through that list and you say, okay, what am I comfortable with? What am I not comfortable with? And you just get those answers through professionals, if it's an engineer or if it's just even a bug guy that needs to come out and tidy up the house.
I like that analogy with the car because it is like, and that's one of the things I like about people coming to the inspection is,
Right,
the belt, for example, may not need to be replaced now, but it will at 100,000 miles. And it's the same
right,
way in the house. So it's like, hey, this is not
right,
actually a problem. But as you own this house, you need to know that this is not going to last forever. And that can just be really powerful to both
right.
budget, I mean, set the right expectations, and also not to get upset when 3 years down the line you do have to replace it because that's just the life of that particular system.
Right, right. And I figure, most appliances have a 10-year age on them. Um, and then something, if you want to go down the rabbit hole, some water heaters have a 10-year age on them. And then if you're buying a home with an HOA, sometimes those bylaws mandate that you have that water heater younger than 10 years old. Otherwise, they won't service any insurance claims.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
the inspector's been there. They're there for 3 or 4 hours. How does the inspection wrap up? Like what happens at the end? The inspector does what?
So any inspection, usually we get that report back within 24 hours. Hopefully you're there for the summer. You can walk through and see what needs to be done, what needs to be done today, what needs to be done in 3 months, what needs to be done in 5 years, all of that timeline. The stuff that needs to be done, I would say within the first 12 months, let's get a professional, an HVAC professional out there to open up the boiler system, take a look at the condensers. Let's get an engineer to come out and make sure that those retaining walls or the foundation is correct. If any of those items come up in the inspection, that's what we want to do. Those items that you are concerned about, we'll want to go one step further and get a professional out there to look at.
I think that's a good point because so while the inspectors are typically super knowledgeable, they
Yeah,
are not actually, I mean, almost always an HVAC technician or an electrician or a plumber. And so they can point out, hey, this isn't right, or I have a concern about this, or you something like that. But then to get the true detail, that's what you're talking about. You need to get somebody else that is actually that expert.
yeah, and going into a negotiation standpoint, a seller's going to want to see a real
Mhm.
quote from somebody, not just some made up dollar amount. That's going to make your negotiations much stronger if you say, American Comfort came out and they said that this condenser has another hour to live and it's $700 to replace
Yeah.
it. So they're going to want to see that than just some inspector's report.
Yeah. Ryan, have you ever seen a perfect inspection? Have you ever seen an inspection where the inspector didn't find anything? Is it possible?
That is not possible, and it's not even possible in new construction. They will find something. They're going to make it to where they have value. Absolutely.
That is their job. I mean, I think that's one of the
Yeah,
biggest,
yeah,
expectations to set with the buyer is it is not going to be perfect. It can be really
no,
great, and it's still going to have a substantial list sometimes.
yeah, yeah. And again, it's all about managing expectations. And it's also important to let the buyer know that what was code yesterday may not be
Mm,
code today.
that's a good
It's a
point.
moving target. So again, just making sure that those expectations are set.
Awesome. So Ryan, this has been super helpful. If you had to give people one, I mean, secret or one like best piece of advice to having a great home inspection process, what piece of advice would you give?
I sound like a broken record, but before that report even comes in, just knowing that there's going to be a lot of stuff that's going to come up, and there's going to be a lot of stuff that could be filler for the
Yep.
report. Um, and right away, what is important to the buyer? Is it the HVAC system, making sure that that's top notch? Is that what is the most important? Sometimes it's just water and foundation. Those are the finding out what are your biggest things that you worry about. Some buyers don't care.
Yeah.
They know what they're getting into, and it's just making sure that all their needs are met, I guess.
Love it. Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, Ryan, thanks for being our guide today. Everyone, thanks
Yeah.
for watching. We appreciate you. We'll see you at the next one. And Ryan, thanks again.
Thanks, Justin.